Hello everyone, this is Hope from Art of Hope Studios. Thank you so much for joining us today for this art tutorial. Here you'll see all the colors that you're going to need to paint this forest painting, and let's get going. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to take a little bit of brown paint, water it down, and just sketch out our path. So our pathway is going to be just a little above halfway to the top of our painting, and you can see that we're doing our canvas lengthwise today, so tall and skinny. I'm just using an 8.5 by 11 canvas board here to paint on. So about halfway above, you're just going to have a small dot, and from that dot you're going to make kind of a V, but it's going to be longer on the right side, shorter on the left side, and get larger as it comes down towards the bottom. So just sketch out where your pathway is going to be, kind of a C on the right hand side and a shorter C on the left there. So once we've sketched that out, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to find our horizon line. So we're going to mix up a little bit of green with a tiny bit of our cadmium red, and that's going to give us an olive color. So take a little bit of green and red and mix them together. It doesn't have to be a perfect color, but you definitely want it on the green side. You don't want it to be on the red side. So kind of an army green there. And we're going to use this color quite a bit for our background. So just from left to right, we're going to sketch out where that horizon line is going to be, and then we're just going to fill in on either side of our pathway with that olivey green color. This is pretty thin down. I'm not doing a real thick layer here. I'm just kind of putting things where I want them on the canvas and just sketching out the general areas here. So if you would like to pause the video here while you sketch that in, you're certainly welcome to. And that'll give you some time to paint in both sides there, and then we'll move on to our next step. Just mixing up a little bit more paint. It doesn't have to be the exact same color. You just want to keep that darker green because this is going to give us some depth to our painting when we put the lighter greens on top of it. I am going to be using a sponge and some Q-tips later on, so if you need to pause the painting and grab those, you'll want those for later. Now our next step is to create the background of the trees. So in the background of our trees, we're going to have some sunlight coming in. So I'm just taking straight white paint, starting in the right hand corner, which is where I'm going to have my sun coming in from, and painting an underlayer of white. Then I'm taking a little bit of medium yellow and just brushing that in, keeping it lighter up on the right hand side and darker on the left hand side. Next, I'm just going to grab a little bit of medium green and blend that right into the yellow, keeping it lighter up at the top. So wiping off my brush often in between so that I don't get too much dark up there in the corner. I really want to keep that very light. So you can see I'm wiping off a little bit, got a little too much green up there. And then I'm going to continue to add in white and yellow to keep it nice and bright. And then it'll get darker green as I come down towards my horizon line. So this color is going to cover our entire background, kind of a real bright yellowy green, brighter in the right hand corner, and then getting darker as I come down towards the background, my forest floor, my horizon line there. Again, this would be a good place to pause the video and work on your background, unless you want to watch the entire background first and then pause it, which works as well. Just bringing in that green towards the horizon line, and then I'm going to brush it up to meet that light green above. Wiping off my brush a lot just to keep it light. And I'm mixing right on the canvas here. So I'm grabbing white and yellow and then a little bit of green and just brushing it on. I'm not pre-mixing this. Got a little bit of red on my brush there, but it won't hurt anything. I'm just going to add in a little bit of green and then brush it up to meet the other background. This is all going to be covered with trees and background, but it really matters if you get your background right first. It can make a huge difference in the finished product of your painting. And that is our background. And you'll notice that I'm keeping my strokes diagonal because I want those streaks in there because I want it to look like sunlight's shining in from that top right-hand corner. Grabbing a little bit of white and yellow there and just kind of streaking it up, but not too much. We're gonna do a little bit more of that later. That's just a little bit of white and yellow on my brush that I'm putting in there. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab a little bit of that army green that we were using before, and I'm going to create the shadow from the trees. So the shadow that's going to be behind the trees. Up until now, I've been using the same brush for the entire painting. It's a 1-inch filbert, but you can use whatever brush you're comfortable with for this larger portion, the background portion. So I'm just taking that army green and I'm gonna brush it right behind the tree line here. And notice I'm going above and below my horizon line because we're creating the shadow for the trees. So I'm going to go above and below my horizon line here, but right there where the pathway is, I want to make sure that my horizon line stays even. So you don't want to lose your pathway turning a corner there. That's what's going to help create this illusion. So I'm actually just going to paint around the very top of my pathway. Now I'm going to use my brush and just brush straight up to create the background for my trees. So just pulling that army green up towards the surface there, just to create the look of maybe some trees off in the background. So we're just creating an illusion here. Nothing special, no special technique here. I'm just turning my brush sideways and pulling up to make it look like some little trees might be back there in the background. And then using my brush the broad way, brushing up around it to give a bit of a background. Now taking that same army green, I'm going to give a second coat to the undergrowth on both sides of my pathway. So we're just using that same army green. So it's green with a little bit of red mixed in. A little bit less red than I used originally. So it's a little more on the green side, a little less on the red side. So if you would like to pause the video at this point, this is a good time to go ahead and work on that. Take your time and mix your color and fill in both sides of your pathway. You're kind of starting to see now that pathway and why it's important that it's smaller at the top and larger on the bottom, starting to see that illusion start to form there. Going to fill in on the right side here now. You can see the red and the green. I'm just mixing it right on there. So it got a little too red. I'm just going to grab some green and mix it right in. Still using that 1-inch filbert. It's just my favorite brush. Now I'm just pulling the paint upwards just like I did in the background, just to create the illusion of maybe some trees off in the background or some undergrowth. Not doing anything fancy, just using my brush. I'm not even getting extra paint. I'm just kind of flicking up the paint that's there to create just an illusion of some undergrowth. Now I've washed off my brush really good, and I'm grabbing just a little bit of white and yellow on my brush, and I've actually wiped the paint off on the side because I want very, very little paint on here. Dried my brush off really good, no extra water. And I'm brushing, starting at the bottom, up towards where my sun is in the top right-hand corner. Just a very, very light sun rays. So you want to dry your brush off really good. You don't want any water on your brush here. So wash it, dry it super good, get all the moisture out. Take a little bit of white and yellow and just kind of dab your brush in it very lightly. And you're going to dry brush over those trees, just a little bit of white and yellow mixed together to create sun rays. You don't need very many of them, just a few. And we're going to be painting trees right over the top, but you'll be able to see through the trees, and that's going to create that look that we're going for. The sponge I'm using now is a very, very porous sponge, so it's got lots of, it's like a sea foam or a sea sponge, so it's got very big holes in it. And I've just dabbed it a little bit in just straight green paint, and I'm just going around where I'm going to be putting trees later to create the second layer. So we've got our army green. Now above that, I'm just going to do straight green, and this is going to look like little leafy things back there in the background. So I'm going to go on both sides of my pathway. I want to make sure not to lose that top of that pathway. So you don't want to go right over the pathway. You want to leave that pathway open. And then just using my sponge, I'm just taking green and going all around where there's going to be trees later, just to create some undergrowth and some leafy looks. I'm going to be using 2 different sponges in this painting. So this is a big porous sponge, and then I'm going to be using later a really fine sponge. So I find couch cushion sponge works well, or just a round, like a kitchen sponge, a little corner of a kitchen sponge that's just got real small pores, works really well as well. Just getting a little more of that green and going up, doing a background for our trees. Now I've grabbed a little bit of white and yellow, and where I feel like the sun is going to hit that undergrowth, I'm just dabbing in a little bit of white and yellow, and with a little bit of green mixed in, so a very light green. You can see it almost matches the background. And I'm just going over some of those undergrowth just to make it look like the sun is going to hit in those spots. So just dabbing a little bit of leafies here and there with my porous sponge. Now I'm not washing my sponge in between. I'm just grabbing a little bit of the darker green again, because our trees are going to be going all the way to the top, up and above the canvas. They're really tall trees. So now I'm going in and doing the exact same thing, but keeping it more loose and open. And I'm doing green with a little bit of that light green and dabbing all the way to the top of the canvas, just to give background to the trees that we're going to be putting in a little bit here. Not doing this in any real specific pattern, just creating little leafy greens. In the middle of our path, I'm going to have it look like the trees are meeting. So you can see that I'm kind of dabbing towards the middle, but you really want to have it up on both sides. Lots of background and undergrowth gives our forest a really rich look. Acrylic paint is just, it's layering after layering after layering. So all this work that we do in the background really makes a difference later. Now I'm taking a little bit of my raw sienna and black and mixing it together, and I'm going to add a little bit of white to it, and we're going to start putting the background in of our trees. So raw sienna, a little bit of black, and some white, and I'm just turning my brush sideways. This is just a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm just going to go straight up and down to create the background trees. So this is a really light color because these trees are off towards the horizon, and the closer things get to the horizon, the lighter they look, the more they blend in with the horizon. As I come forward, I'm going to do larger trunks with more color in them. So now this is my second layer. I've got my real light ones in the back, and now I'm making my tree trunks bigger and darker. So adding in more raw sienna and more black, and just putting in some background trunks. And these are going to be thinner because my trunks towards the very front are going to be the darkest and are going to be the largest. I'm having my trunks follow the path, so you can see I'm just doing straight up and down lines. Nothing fancy about this, just creating the look of background trees. The trees are in the front are going to go all the way to the top, but you're not going to see the tops of these trunks. So I'm just kind of going up into the leaves at different lengths and different heights, keeping the ones in the back really light and the ones in the front darker. Now I'm going to mix more black into my raw sienna because these trees here in the front are going to be the largest and the darkest. So I'm going to have one right here in the front. That's going to be my daddy tree. Actually, we're going to have one, I think I'm going to do one even larger towards the front. But you can see now I'm taking a little more time with each trunk. This one's going to go straight up over the top of the canvas, but it's not coming right up to the path. I'm going to have a couple of closer ones right up to the path here. So drawing in the trees that are going to be closest to us, it's most important that these are darker and are put right where I want them. As you go back, so if you follow your path and do darker trees as you go back, make sure that they follow the path and that they get smaller as they get more towards the back, so that it keeps that illusion that you're walking down a path and it's getting further away. And you can see now how important that background was. Do you see how that background that we created with the light coming in towards the top and the dark greens at the bottom where it would be more shadowed creates the look of a forest behind there and its undergrowth down below? I'm making the trees a little darker on the left side and a little lighter on the right side where the sun would be hitting them. And you can see as I get back towards the back, the trees are smaller and thinner. They might be the same size as the trees in front, but because they're getting further away, they're a little thinner. And I'm choosing a few of the trees that I did in the beginning, the really light ones, and adding a little bit of color into a couple of them here and there. Just you stand back a few feet, take a look at your picture, and kind of figure out where it needs more color. Now we're going to do the same thing on the right-hand side. Anytime you feel like you're rushing or you need a little more time, you can rewind, pause the video, and then start it back up when you're ready for the next instruction. Now you can see in the back there, I'm keeping those trees much smaller and thinner. It's really important for the illusion that you don't have huge trees in the background because it'll make the painting look flat. It won't look like you're going anywhere. Okay, we're going to start working on our pathway now. So just taking straight raw sienna, we're going to go ahead and fill it in on the right hand side, brushing towards the left. So just go ahead and paint that raw sienna on the right hand side of your pathway. At the very top, just barely filling it in. You don't want to get that too big there. Brushing it in on the right hand side and then taking your brush and pulling it over to the left very lightly, because the left side of our pathway is going to be brighter than our right side. Now take your raw sienna, add a tiny bit of black into it and some white, and then you're going to brush that from the left hand side over into your raw sienna on the right. And you can go back and forth between these. So on the right hand side, we want to create that shadow color. You can even add a tad bit of black into your raw sienna to create that shadow color on the right. Brush that towards the left. Then wipe off your brush on your paper towel and get that lighter color and put it on the left hand side, brushing it over into the right. As you get towards the top, you're just going to keep it that medium color because you're not going to see the light so much. Then what I like to do is take my brush and just turn it sideways and pull over a couple of those medium colors as if you're seeing the shadow of some of the trees. Once you've done that, you can pause the video until you finish with that portion. But once you've done that, go ahead and take a little bit of your army green color. And if you remember how we mixed that, it was just a little bit of green mixed with a little bit of red, or more green, a little bit of red. And we're just going to brush in right above our pathway a shadow for some little greens that are going to be coming up on the side of our pathway. So just brushing in where we're going to have some greens. And what I'm doing is I put the green there and then I just pull it up with my brush, just kind of brush it straight up, kind of like we did with the trees before. So just put the color there and pull it straight up. As you get towards the back, you're not going to pull it up as much because you wouldn't see as much detail. So in the front, just kind of brushing straight up, almost like little grasses pulling up there. But in the back, just putting a little bit of that dark green color. Make sure not to cover your pathway. This is on the side of your pathway where the trees are. So just putting in a little bit of that army green color there. We're going to have some flowers here later, so. Working a little bit more on my pathway here, so taking a little bit of that lighter color, and I'm going to brush that in towards the left again. See how I'm leaving gaps there where it looks like the trees might be Might be shadowing the pathway. As I get up towards the top, I'm not putting any light, just leaving it that raw sienna color. You can play with this for a little while. Pause the video or watch this portion all the way through and then work on it. Now I'm pulling from the other side. So just kind of working back and forth until you like the way it looks. I want it to look like you're seeing the shadow of those trees running across the path because the light's coming in from behind the trees. That's our whole illusion. It's okay to take your time with this. Just go back and forth until you're happy with how it looks. Now I'm taking a little bit of that light green that we had from before, that same background color. So it's the white and yellow mixed with a little bit of green. You don't have to do this part if you don't want to, but I think it's really fun. So I'm just, and you remember how we did it before where we had it, our brush was really, really dry, washed it and dried it, and I'm just doing a few little sun rays coming in from behind the trees. You don't want to have this in front of all the trees. So I'm picking a couple of trees and just pulling a little bit of light in from behind those trees. We're gonna have leaves on top of this later, but this little bit of light coming in just creates a really fun look. So just brushing down at an angle from a couple of trees, sunlight kind of beaming in there. So again, it's just a really dry brush with just the tiniest bit. I've just barely tapped the end of my brush in that white yellowish green and just, so there's barely any paint on there, and then just brushing it up. Kind of have it hitting the path right there. Just kind of fun. Going back to my brown and black now. So this is my raw sienna mixed with a little bit of black, and I have a fan brush here, and what I'm doing is I'm adding water into my paint, and then right above my path I'm just going to tap on the brush so that some little specks go on my path to make it look like gravel or dirt. So I'm adding water into my black paint, my black and brown paint, so the dark brown, and then I'm just splattering a little bit, tap, 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 on the brush, right above my pathway there, just to make it look like little bits of dirt or gravel are on that pathway. I don't want it to go anywhere else, so I'm being very careful just to keep it right above the pathway there. So just holding it above the pathway and just tapping on the brush to give it the look of some little dirt or gravel on the pathway there. This is my smaller sponge now, so I'm just using a real tight sponge. This is actually a couch cushion sponge, and I've dipped it in just straight green. And I'm using just the corner of it, the longer corner of it, to dab in now my leafy greens from my evergreen trees. I'm gonna, I have green, and then I'm tapping into a little bit of yellow and white. Got a lot of white on that one, so I'll be adding some green into that. And just tapping in my front leaves now. We've got all our background leaves, so these are going to be my front leaves now. So we're just going to keep going with this. So I'm just taking my time, and I don't want to cover all of my tree trunks. I just want to make sure that I'm picking some spots and putting little bits of green in. Wherever I think the light is shining on, I'm going to add a little bit more of that yellow and white in. So this is just really fun. So with our sponge, I'm using my longer side of it. So instead of using just a flat square piece of the sponge, I'm just taking the corner of it and adding some in. And every now and then I'm grabbing that other sea sponge just to add a little bit of different texture. So kind of going back and forth between the tight sponge, and really a kitchen sponge works just fine for this, and then the more porous sea sponge. And we're just going to go ahead and keep doing this all the way across our painting. I'm going to do quite a bit above on the canopy because I want to cover the tops of those tree trunks, and I want to make sure it looks like some of the leaves are in front of the other tree trunks. The canopy is really where you want to have quite a bit, and you want it to cross over into the middle there. Just highlighting the ends of each one with a little bit of the green mixed with yellow, a little bit of white here and there mixed in with the green and yellow to make it even lighter. A little too much right there, so I'm going to add a little bit of green in. If you get a little too light or a little too dark somewhere, you can just add a little bit of light or a little bit of the darker green to it. Don't ever feel like you have to throw it out or it's not fixable. The great thing about acrylic paint is you can let it dry and paint right over it. The illusion, by putting the lighter branches in the middle, really creates the look that the light's coming in from behind and gives it just that really light, pretty sun ray look. If you're not sure where it needs light, stop, put everything down, step back 10 feet, take a look at it, and decide where you want it to be a little lighter or a little darker. So again, this is where you might want to pause the video or just watch this section and then pause it, but take your time putting in your greenery. This really brings the entire picture together. This really, just all that background work that you did now will really pay off. This is all those smaller trees. This just really gives your forest depth. Putting some right in the very front also makes it look like there's forest behind, which I love. Don't put them right in front of your pathway, but in front of those tree trunks. Now I'm going to use that same little sponge, and above where I did the army green on the side of my path, I'm just going to very lightly touch in all the way, about halfway up the path probably, to give it the look of some little ferns or greenery growing up on the side of the path. So I have yellow mixed with green here, just a little bit lighter, and I'm just tapping it very lightly above my path there. Not too much on the right because you wouldn't really see that, just maybe a few about halfway up, mostly on the left. And remember, as you get up towards the top of your path, you want very little because you really wouldn't see that. Now I'm going to grab my liner brush, and a liner brush is just a long, thin brush, and you don't have to have a liner brush here. You can use just a very small brush. The liner brush really gives this a better look, and I'm just going to create some little limbs. So I've really watered down my brownish black paint and rolled my liner brush in it, and I'm going to use my liner brush just to create some little limbs here. So just pick some places behind your leaves there, or coming from your trees out to the other trees where you might see some little limbs. And that starts bringing the trees all together with your limbs. It doesn't just look like your limbs are out there nowhere. So just pick a few little spots back where you might see some limbs behind the trees or in front of the trees, coming up from the trees. And with the liner brush, it really just does a lot of the work. You just roll the brush, you water your paint down, roll the brush in it, and then just let the liner brush pull that paint out. And there's some nice real thin lines there to create some limbs. I'm pulling some across the canopy here so it looks like the trees are meeting in the middle. And I'm not going back and getting paint a ton. I'm kind of just letting the paint wear out. So I just kind of keep painting with it until there's no more paint left on the brush. This part's so much fun. Just, again, this is where you kind of stand back and take a look and just put some little tiny limbs. Just take your time. Here, I think I was just messing with my pathway a little bit. I've got some leaves right in the very back, and I wanted the very, very top of my pathway. I wanted you to be able to see it, so I'm painting over those limbs and just putting a little bit of dark right above the end of my pathway there. Now the last little touch that I'm going to do on this painting with my Q-tip here is I'm going to just dip it in a little bit of white and yellow, and I'm going to add some little tiny flowers just to the edge of this pathway here. I'm going to keep these fairly small. Every now and then you might get a large one, and if you do, you can just cover it up with a little bit of green or kind of smudge it in, but I just think this really adds to the look of your pathway. So just where I put that green foliage, I'm just touching a little bit here and there to add some little tiny flowers to the very front of my, or to the very edge of my pathway here. Remember to get smaller as you get towards the top. I'm not going to go all the way to the top because you just wouldn't really see those. Do a little bit on the other side as well. Grabbing a little bit of yellow, going between yellow and white. Looking back and trying to decide if there's any other little touches that it needs. If I got a little bit, I think I'm just adding a little bit of green where I felt like my flower was a little bit too big there. A few little more leaves. Just going back and doing all those little final touches. I think I wanted a little bit of, where the sunlight was hitting that leaf there, I felt like I just wanted a little bit of yellow. And that just made me happy. And with that, our picture is finished. Thanks so much for painting with me. I hope you'll join me again for another paint tutorial. Patreon.com/HopeWirta. See you soon. Take care.